means to have a blessed life. And just so you know, all of our campuses are going to be diving deeper into what it is to have a blessed life and going into deeper discussions during the week, diving deep into topics like freedom, peace, scarcity versus generosity mindset, what it means to live a stress-free life. This is such an important topic that all of our campus pastors are going to be leading the midweek group study. Our heart is that on the other side of this series in groups, everyone in our church would have a healthier relationship with their finances and an understanding of why they matter to God. So do yourself a favor, download the Church Center app, take a look at all of your options of where the midweek study groups will be, and be a part of the blessed life.
Awesome. So naturally, anytime churches have conversations about money, there's always a little hesitancy and a little like reservation, and so I promise you this series is going to be super helpful. It's going to be very encouraging. You will get a lot out of it, and as Pastor Moses just said, I'm actually leading a small group starting this Thursday, and I think we have that slide. Did I give you that slide? Nope, not that one. Did I give you the small group slide? I did not give you that slide. All right, well, in any event, it's starting this Thursday. We will get that information posted to our Facebook page and Facebook groups and Instagram, so you have that. It's going to be Thursday from 6 to 7 at our house. My wife acts like she's hearing this for the first time, but it has been about a month since we talked about it. So in fairness to her, she's probably forgot about the last time I talked with her about this. So it might actually be a marriage counseling group, so you can come and just hear us kind of work out some of our marriage issues if you'd like. That might be helpful to you. No, but we would love to have you join us Thursday, 6 o'clock at our place. Just find me afterwards, or like I said, just pop onto our social media platforms starting today, and we'll have all that linked for you so you can have the information. I'm going to invite the ushers. Go ahead and come on forward as we prepare to give. Just a reminder, as Andrew said, if you're new around here, man, well, we would love for you to participate in every part of the service. We want you to know, like, this is not a deal where, we're like, everybody take out their wallet. This is just those of us who belong here, who this is our church, who love, what we're about, who have been blessed by what God is doing here in our church. It's like, all right, man, we just want to be able to be a part of what God's doing. And so we'd love for you to join in, but we just want you to know we want to give you something. One other thing, that slide, I did actually want to talk about this real quick. We put this together so that you have an idea of what happens to the money when you give. And so it kind of breaks down the percentage of every dollar. One of the things that I love about this, if you take the campus, all of our staffing, our people, all of the ministry and outreach that we do, and then just the facilities that it takes to operate a church, like 90% of every dollar that you give goes directly to what our church is about. It goes directly to making a difference in people's lives, to providing these spaces, to paying to having amazing staff people that lead our kids programs and do and serve in all the different ways that fund our community outreach stuff. Like 90 cents out of every dollar that you give winds up going to the very thing that you're going like, I wonder how much this costs for them to do all this. Well, that tells you right there, 90 cents out of every dollar that comes in goes directly to everything that you see and experience when you're connected to our church. And so thank you for being a part of that, for making a difference. And so I'm going to pray. I'm going to invite the ushers to pass the buckets. If you'd like to give electronically, you can do that as well. We'll leave that slide on the screen for just a moment because there's 4 different ways that you can give. Not that slide, the 4 ways you can give. There you go. And so if you want to give electronically, you can do that as well. God, we love you. Thank you so much for today. Thank you for your love and grace. We honor you. We give because you've given to us. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, ushers, please pass those buckets. All right. And then you can, there we go. Perfect. You guys are professionals. I don't know if you really thought about it much, but one of the universal experiences that we all deal with in life are the gaps that exist in our lives between our expectations of something and what we actually experience in that moment. And it's true of us in all kinds of ways. It's true personally. Like, I don't know if you've ever decided that you were going to try something or do something or change something about your life, but then you actually went to go and try it and do it or change it, and it didn't quite go how you thought it was going to go. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this moment where you're just like, you're feeling out of shape, you know, and you're just like, I'm just going to get back in shape. And you're just like, that's it. You know, I'm going to plank every day, you know, for 2 minutes when I wake up, or you come up with some ridiculous plan and you do it for a couple of days. And on the third day, you're just like, I'm just going to plank in bed. You know, that's the best place to plank. You know, but the gaps between our expectations and our experiences happen for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's because our perceptions of ourselves and of the world around us are kind of off. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's some bad drivers out there. Anybody ever notice that? How many people would say that you are better than the average driver? Anybody willing to just say that? How many people would you'd go, I'm a terrible driver, I'm worse than the average driver? Okay, a couple people. Some spouses were like, you need to raise your hand. You're terrible. Well, if you believe that you are better than the average driver, you are not alone. In fact, surveys regularly say, and I read one recently where 93% of all drivers say that they're better than the average driver. Who knew? Guys, I didn't really know that like our church was such a giant collection of amazing drivers, because it was like 70 or 80% of us were like, we're better than all the other drivers on the road. We're the perfect church for the perfect drivers. That's what we are. So, but it's not just drivers, right? Like in the same study, they discovered that 90% of students see themselves as smarter than the average student. Not to be outdone by the students, the professors themselves. 94% of professors said that they're better than the average professor. And the best part about this particular study is that 92% of all of the people in this study, of all these same people, said that they are less biased than the average person. That they are an expert with no bias in being able to ascertain their own abilities in these areas. That is what we know in psychology as the halo effect, right? Where you think of things better than they are. You think of yourself better than you actually are. Now, sometimes there are gaps between what we expect, right, and what we experience personally, but it's also true in our relationships and our families too. Like no matter how prepared you are, how much you love each other, there's always gaps when you get married between what you expected and what you actually experience, right? No matter how great it is, it's just different in different ways. Or when you have kids, there are moments that nothing or no one can prepare you for. So we have 4 kids. My oldest son is 21. When he was about 5 or 6 years old, we only had 2 kids at that time. My daughter was like 4-ish. We were living in the North Bay, in the San Francisco North Bay, and we were coming out of, getting on the freeway, and it was an exit to like 580, the exchange from 101, and so I was kind of cutting over, and I didn't see that there was a bypass where I could have just stayed in my lane and still ended up on 101. I thought it was trying to force me off onto 580, and I knew I was going to end up way over somewhere I didn't want to go, so I cut across these lanes, and there was giant signs. I just missed the sign, so I get pulled over. The CHP pulls me over. He pulls me over. I get out, and it's not fun being pulled over, but I've had my fair share of interactions with the California Highway Patrol. And so he walks up to my window and he starts talking to me, and my 6-year-old son goes, "Good job, officer. My dad is a terrible driver. He speeds everywhere he goes. Give him a ticket. Give him a ticket. Don't let him off the hook." He's just yelling. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Would you shut up? Good Lord. Or does anybody know people who don't have kids, but they're experts on parenting? Anybody know those people? Yeah. Like, I think we all know those same people, right? But the truth is, we were kind of that way too, right? Before we had kids, like, you thought you knew what it was going to be like, but you didn't, right? You had all these expectations about the kind of parent you were going to be. My kids, they're going to just eat whatever I tell them to eat. They're going to eat healthy, and they're not going to be picky, and That was before you knew what it was like to negotiate with a toddler, right? Like you had no idea that human children could survive on a diet of just nothing but dinosaur nuggets, but they can, it turns out. Or how about this one where you're like, I will never bribe my kids. They're just going to do what I tell them to do, right? And then that gives way to just give them the iPad to get them to shut up. And that's not even talking about bedtime, right? Like bedtimes when you have toddlers and preschoolers, you're like, oh, dear God. One of my favorite comedians is Jim Gaffigan. He says sometimes putting your kids to bed, yeah, all right, is like a hostage negotiation, but in reverse. Like if you'll just stay in there, we'll meet all of your demands, which is true. You've probably seen this meme, but I love the meme that says, as soon as you say, my child will never, here they come, nevering like they never nevered before, which is 100% true. And it'd be one thing, right? The gaps would be one thing if it was just dinosaur nuggets and bedtime bribes. But what about the gaps that are more significant, right? The ones that matter, the relationship gaps or the character gaps or the how our family operates gaps. Because whether you have kids or not, we all have moments in our families where we feel the tension of what I wanted us to be and what I thought we were doesn't really feel, it's not how we actually are. It's not who we are. It's uncomfortable, right? So that's why we've been in this series in Family Month, where we've been talking about shifting from the paradigms and the systems that were handed or that we inherited from our culture or from our own family to trying to come up with something better and healthier and stronger, where we make the shift where our family acts and operates more like a team, where we're teammates, we're not in competition with one another, where we know why our team exists, where we have a mission and we know how it operates, we know the strategies and the plays, where there's this sense that everybody's on the same page. So, and then there was a couple of weeks ago, the last time I was here, where I promised you, where I had worksheets for you to be able to work through some of this stuff, and then remembered right after that I left them at home. And so we have all of those for you. So, man, do you ever just wish you could have a do-over? Like, I just wish I could go back to just rewind and give these out. But we have these for you. They're over at the Connect counter. You can grab them on your way out. I would encourage you to pick those up. It will take just a few minutes, no matter what your family's like, whether you're married or single or recently single. No, it doesn't matter. Like, you sit down, begin to work through some of that stuff, and start to figure out some really healthy paths forward for your family. Now, all of that leads us to the obvious question, even if you do all of this stuff, right? Even if you sit down with these worksheets, even if you have these conversations, how do you get the good things that you want for your family to stick? How does your family actually become the way that you want it to be? How do you avoid Family Month? How do you avoid these 4 weeks or these 5 weeks, this whole conversation from becoming just one more thing that just sort of gets sucked into and swallowed up in the gap that exists between what we expect and what we want and what we actually experience in our families? Well, there's a story in the Old Testament where the people were trying to really navigate that same tension and that same situation. So after the people, the nation of Israel, were delivered out of Egypt, out of slavery by Moses, Moses dies, and this guy Joshua is now leading the whole nation of Israel. And it's basically one massive family, and they're at a crossroads. And so Joshua does what we would do. He calls a family meeting, and he decides to give a speech. And this is how it goes. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 14, it says, He's speaking to the whole nation of Israel, right? And he says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods that your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors that they served or the gods of the Amorites in whose land that you're currently living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And so Joshua is trying to deal with the gap between who they say they are and who they actually are, between what they say they're about and what they're actually about. And he basically calls them together and he gives them a dad speech. Any dads in the house that have given the speech, you call the family meeting, you hold the family meeting, you give the dad speech, and he gives a pretty good one, right? It's stern, but it's kind of inspirational. It's got the whole, like, if your ancestors jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff part? You know, like, if your ancestors worship the wrong gods, you're just going to go worship those gods. And it's kind of sarcastic, right? Where he's like, if you find it undesirable to be in this family, you can go find another family, basically, right? If you find it undesirable to worship, I don't know, the real God, the God who has proven himself, the God who's saved and rescued you, you could go and worship those other gods that your ancestors worship. You know, the ones that God completely destroyed. Like, he's totally being sarcastic. And then he ends it with one of his most iconic, not his most, one of the most iconic statements in the whole Bible. It's a statement that we put on pictures and placards, and people declare it all the time on social media. He says this, he says, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Boom, mic drop. That's a dad speech. And the best part is it works. I mean, look at how everybody responds in the next verse. It says, and the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord, to serve other gods. It was the Lord God himself who brought us and our parents out of Egypt from the land of slavery and performed these great signs before our eyes. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. And it's wow. I mean, just talk about a moment. I mean, these are the kind of family moments that are amazing, right? Where, like Joshua, you call everybody together and you make the speech and you paint the picture, and everyone, even the teenager with the attitude who barely talks to you, buys in and is listening for someone for some reason, and they're excited and they're committed, and everybody's on the same page. And so the people in the story are like, this is who we're going to be. And they meant it. And it was true for a little while until it wasn't. So in the very next chapter of this story, Joshua, the leader in this moment, dies. And then look at what happens. The story actually continues in the next book, which is called Judges. In Judges chapter 2, it says this. It says, and all that generation was gathered to their fathers. That's just a very biblical, poetic way of saying they all did. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served not God, but Baal, and they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers. And so in one moment, you have the parents going, this is who we are, this is who we're going to be, this is what our family's going to be about. And the kids are like, they grow up and they're like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but not really into that anymore. So I'm just going to scrap all that and do something else. That's not really what I'm about. The parents were like, we will never forsake God. Look at all he's done for us. We will always serve the Lord. And the kids are kind of like, I don't know. It kind of feels old-fashioned. I mean, what's God done for us anyway? Don't you know it's not about God these days, mom and dad? Okay, boomer. It's about Baal these days. We're worshiping Baal. I mean, talk about a massive gap between what they wanted and declared and expected and what actually was experienced. I can't help but wonder every time I read this story, how did things get so far off when you have this moment where everybody's going, this is what we're about, this is what we're gonna do. And then it's like, and then they didn't do it. Well, we don't know exactly what happened in this story, but I want you to notice in the passages that we read that we see that they had this part in Judges, this new generation, they had both a belief and a behavior problem, right? So it says that they stopped believing, or that they didn't know God, or they didn't know what he had done for them. And when it uses the word know, it's not talking about information, right? Because these are people, these are kids who had grown into adults. They were taught all the right things as kids. They grew up in church. They were taught all the stories. So it wasn't that they lacked information, like, who is this God you speak of? No. They knew exactly who he was. It means that they hadn't experienced it for themselves. They hadn't stepped into that faith and gone, this is who I'm going to be. That's who you guys were, mom and dad. But that's not what I'm going to do. For them, it was just stories. It was just something that their parents were sort of into. And so as their beliefs faded and they got into adulthood, well, naturally their behaviors, how they were living, changed. And so they not only abandoned their faith, the scriptures tell us that their lives and their families became so broken, so messed up, that it describes the stuff that they start messing around with and in as being evil. Now, this story isn't only for parents, but if you are a parent, isn't this the tension and sort of fear that you have, especially if your kids are little or as they start growing into being teenagers, that you have a moment where you suddenly realize that your kids don't believe what you thought they believed, or that they're not who you thought they were, or you discover that they're doing things and behaving in ways that violate everything that you taught them when they were growing up, where you discover there's a gap between the family that you thought you were raising and the one you're actually raising. I've been a pastor for 27 years, spent a lot of time as a youth pastor and as a lead pastor, and I'm telling you, this moment that I'm describing has happened so many times. Or one day people wake up and their family's not what they thought it was. Their marriage isn't what they thought it was. Their spouse isn't who they thought they were. Their kids aren't who they, and then they come and they're like, you got to fix this. It's like, you can't, no, what? There's no waving a magic wand. That can get better. That can be healed. You can grow through this. This isn't the end, but there's a journey that you got to walk through. See, everything we've said in this series so far is really important, but all of us know that just talking about something isn't enough. Like, you definitely have to talk about it. There's no doubt about that, but you can't just talk about it, because it's what you do in your life that makes all the difference. So Joshua and the people, they made passionate and powerful declarations and decisions about who they were going to be, and they prayed and they committed and they meant it. So what happened? See, because no matter how passionate, no matter how genuine our declarations or our decisions are, without repeated practices, they're just good intentions. They're just nice ideas. And ultimately, our families won't become who we'd hoped or what we intended. See, when you actually stop to think about it, when you think about it this way, healthy, successful families, however you define that, families that are strong and healthy, that have an impact, that are making a difference in the world and for the people around them, and then struggling, unhealthy families that are just sort of existing, that the relationships are strained or broken. Both of those families, for the most part, they all have the same goals. They all want the same basic things. So then what is the difference? Well, there's an interesting instruction in Proverbs chapter 22. In verse 6, it says this: train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Now, if you are a church person, or even if you're not a church person, you've probably heard this verse. Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Because this is one of those things that parents who are in the moment of discovering that their kids are not who they thought they were, this is one of those moments where they go, oh my God, I need this promise. I trained him up in the way he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. And so this is the verse that gets quoted a lot. And honestly, this is a great bit of wisdom, by the way. I think Solomon is making an observation of probability here, not an actual promise from God. He's going, if you train your kids, if you raise your kids to be a certain way, the chances of them actually living into that as adults is pretty good. That's what he's saying. And so this is a great bit of wisdom for parents, but it's also just a great bit of wisdom for all of us. And so I want to tackle it maybe from a slightly different way in which it normally gets applied. So because our families don't rise to the level of our hopes and preferences, they will ultimately fall and settle at the level of whatever our habits and patterns and rhythms and routines are in our family, in your relationship. It's true in every relationship. Right? We don't become who we try to be, who we intend to be. We become who we train to be, who we live out and practice to be. So knowing your purpose and your mission and your vision and your values, all of that stuff is extremely important to the foundation of your family. But if you don't live it out, it won't stick and it won't make any difference. And so the guy who wrote that proverb, Solomon, he says, you got to train. And he intentionally chose that imagery. Training is about practices and schedules and rituals and rhythms and routines. And he's going, don't just tell them, don't just talk about it, don't just believe in them, don't just hope and pray. Do all of that. but build into the rhythm and the routines of your family how you're going to practice this. You got to train, you got to practice. If you've ever played sports, winning teams, or you're just a fan of sports, winning teams not only know what game they're playing. I mean, that's kind of important. That's actually one of the things we talked about in the previous weeks. They not only know what their team is about, they have a clear picture of their mission and their strategy, the players that they have and the talent, and that informs their strategy, the playbook, what their family's going to be about, how they're going to live out who they are. But none of that on a sports team, none of that in the sports arena replaces the need for the team to practice. In fact, it's just the opposite, right? It's in practice that all of those things actually materialize. It's practice that puts skin on it. It's practice where those things actually come alive. It's practice where the players learn their roles and how to communicate with one another and how to get along with each other. It's practice where they learn how to put the playbook into actual implementation, right? It's in practice that they learn what the team is actually about. It's in practice that they ultimately learn how to win. So when I was in high school, I played varsity basketball, and I know that my physique screams dominating basketball player. But the coach drilled into us over and over and over, my high school basketball coach. You play how you practice. You play how you practice. You play how you practice. That what we do in the game will merely reveal what we've been doing in practice. That what we do in the game will merely reveal how hard we've worked, how hard we've trained, how well we know each other because of the way that we've practiced. You're like, that doesn't sound very spiritual. I got something for you. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. This guy named Paul was writing this letter, and he uses this same kind of language and analogy in verse 24. He says, don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs? Thanks, Paul. That's a really obvious observation. But only one person gets the prize. And he says, so run to win. Because all the athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, that doesn't matter ultimately in the grand scheme of things. But we are doing this for an eternal prize. Now, the Apostle Paul is using this comparison in this language to make a spiritual point, and it's a powerful one. But I want to zoom out just a little bit and just think of this just in terms of your family, right? If athletes train for a trophy, how much more is it worth it for you and I to actually train in our families so that we can win, so that we can move into becoming who we dream for our family to be? By the way, we've all heard the dumb phrase that practice makes perfect. Not only is it dumb, it's not true. Practice doesn't make perfect, but it does make persistent and predictable patterns in our life. It makes new and awkward things more natural. Besides all that, perfection isn't the goal. Consistency is the goal. In practice, whatever you're practicing, it builds habits and muscle memory. It closes the gap between what we intend and what is actual reality. There's a word that God uses in the scriptures to describe this whole idea, this whole concept, and that word is faithfulness. And it keeps showing up in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's this idea that you got to keep showing up. You got to practice what you preach. It's not what you say. It's not what you intend. You got to live it out in the everyday reality of your life. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 3, he says, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. And that's what we all want, right? Our families to win with God and with other people and in life. And we want to believe that all it takes is love, that if our love is just big enough and strong enough, that it'll all turn out okay. And God is going, actually, it takes more than love. It takes love and faithfulness. That love is essential, but by itself, it's not enough. If you want to win, you also need faithfulness, discipline, training, practice. And we intuitively know this, right? You know some really good people in your life whose family relationships are really struggling. And you would not identify the problem in some of those situations as being a lack of love. In fact, you would go, no, they really do love each other. I don't know what the problem is. And Solomon's so adamant about it. He says, never let them leave you, love and faithfulness. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablets of your heart and the hearts of your kids and your family. What is he saying? He's going, make them a part of you. Ingrain them deep into your soul. And how do you do that? Discipline, practice, training, routines, rhythms, conversations, rituals. By the way, no matter what your family looks like currently, how it's constituted, or what your role is on the team, we're all in the game. So don't be a fat coach. Anybody ever had one of those growing up? The coach is like harping on you, yelling at you, and he's over there like eating a cheeseburger, and you're like, dude, you could not do the thing that you're telling me to do, right? And that's kind of what we do in relationships. Don't do what I say, just do what I do. We do it with each other. We do it with our kids. Don't watch me, just do the right thing. I told you what to do, just go do it. But here's the deal. If you want it to be in them, they have to see it in you. And I'm speaking specifically now to parents. If you want whatever it is, if you want it, you can insert whatever you want right there. If you want it to be in them, they have to see it over and over and over again in you. You can't say that it exists. You can't say that you believe it. You can't say it's important. They have to see it in you. Because if it seems optional to you at all, it will be completely unnecessary to them. And I think that is part of what happened in the Joshua story. Right? Because we can say all kinds of things, that this is important and this is important and this is important. But then the way that we live as if those things are optional. And if it's optional to you, or it seems optional to you, it will be completely unnecessary to them. I always have, it always cracks me up because for years, I've had so many of these conversations with people who had really bad experiences with a church or religious environment. And so they grow up, and their philosophy with their own kids is like, I don't want to force them to go. I want them to learn to love it for themselves. And the weird thing about that flawed logic is we don't apply that to anything else in life, right? Because my immediate question is like, do you force them to go to school? I thought don't you want them just to learn to love learning for themselves? Why would you force them to go to school? Right? If they're on a sports team, do you just go, I don't make them go to practice. I really want them to love the sport for themselves. They won't be on the team very long, I can tell you that. Right? And so the option that we paint ourselves into this false choice of like, we have to like cram it down their throat or just let them do whatever they want and find it for themselves. It has to be in you. If it's in you, if it matters to you, if it's a priority to you and your schedule, if this matters to you and not, all these little things come in and bump all this other stuff all out of the way. No. If it matters to you and you give it priority, it will be important and will matter to them, even if they don't get it. It's got to be in you. If you want them to be generous, they got to see it in you over and over and over again. You want them to be kind, they got to see you be kind and loving over, not just to them, to other people over and over and over again. You want them to love Jesus, they have to see you loving Jesus over and over and over again. And if it all seems optional, if it all just feels like, it's a good idea, they'll grow up and be like, it was kind of cool. We had some good experiences, but that's not what I'm going to do. There's this really famous verse by the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4. It says, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely, holy and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. And this verse comes right at the end of one of the most beautiful and powerful sections in all of Scripture. You should go read it. Like, read all of Philippians. It's a fantastic book. If you don't have time for that, read Philippians chapter 4. I mean, it is like gold after gold after gold after gold. The problem when we read it is we usually stop with the verse that I just read, verse 8. But the Apostle Paul punctuates everything he says up to this point in the chapter in Philippians chapter 4, verse 9. He says, keep putting into practice all that you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Right? Do you see how he's bringing together all the stuff that we've been talking about? The idea of practice. Like, I want it to be in you, and I know you saw it in me. So the things you saw in me, the things you saw that I didn't just say it was important, that I lived it out, those things keep putting into practice. This has actually been one of the guiding verses for my life as an adult, as a pastor, as a leader, as a friend, as a husband, and definitely as a dad. Because every time I'm tempted to just, do what I say and not what I do, and just every time I sense that gap between what I say I'm about and what I say is important and what actually is happening in my own life, I come back to this verse because this is what I want to live up to. Because the Apostle Paul is basically saying the best way to train your family is to train yourself. Because in the end, our priorities are revealed by our practices way more than what we say we're passionate about. By what we do, way more than what we say. And the truth is, most of us don't actually lack passion in our families or for our families. We just lack a plan. And I get it. Like, I've shared with you before, like, I am the no plan person. Like, I'm wired in a way where I don't like plans. Plans feel like oppressive. My wife, the conversation we've had more times ever in any conversation in 27 years of marriage is her asking me, what is my plan? She is a plan with legs. Everything is planned out. Her whole life is a plan. I have no plan. Get away from me with the plan. But even if you're just sort of that freewheeling, free spirit sort of person like me, where you don't want to plan, like, you have areas in your life where you have plans. You know how I know? Because you don't live on the street. You have a home because you paid the bills, right? You have power and electricity in your house because you have a plan, and you have at least a basic plan for how to pay those bills. You actually have kids. You feed yourself. You're alive. Like, you have basic plans in your life for getting the stuff done. Why should your family not benefit from you taking the opportunity or taking the time to invest a little bit of time to have a plan on who you're going to be and what that training and how those practices are going to be? And so the question in all of this is, where do we start? As I said a second ago, this week is the culmination of this month-long thing of some really big conversations about mission and values and what we're going to be about. And if you haven't done any of those exercises, I encourage you to start there. Go back and listen to the previous messages. You can pick up those worksheets, as I said, in the back. Start there. But there's a couple of things that I want to leave with you kind of on a practical level of what this looks like just for us today. Number one, just learn to say no to a lot of really good things so that you can actually say yes to the things that matter. See, this is a huge problem in our culture because we believe the lie that there's some magical way to arrange our schedule where we can do and see and have and experience it all, but you can't. You're going to have to make some trade-offs. And you're going to have to say no to some stuff that's not bad stuff. It's good stuff. But it just keeps you from becoming, it just keeps you busy in ways where you can't actually practice the things that matter most. I love, I've written this down so many times and come back to it. John Maxwell is a leadership author. He wrote this in one of his books, and when I came across it, it stunned me, and I went back and read it again. He says this, he says, you cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything that we involve ourselves in. And that is so true. The stuff that fills and populates your schedule and your days, that keeps you running ragged and keeps you from seeing the people you love the most and spending time with the people that mean the most to you, like the unimportance of almost all of it. It can't be overstated. So you're going to have to actually make some decisions. So how do you make those decisions in your family, really? Like, is it based on what seems like just the sort of the best option at the time? Or is it based on who you've decided you want to be and the kind of family that you want to have long term? When you have to make those hard decisions and say no to some good things, do you take the time to explain and help everybody on the team understand why? Does everybody know what you're doing and why? Do you stop and celebrate when someone on the team demonstrates what your family's about? In our family, we have a really high value for honesty because honesty breeds trust. And so that's the conversation that we talk about in our family over and over and over again. On top of that, my wife is wired in a way that the single most hurtful, destructive thing you can do in a relationship with her is to lie to her. She grew up in a very black and white. Her personality is black and white. I'm over here. My world is shades of gray. I have a very loose relationship with the truth when I was a kid, okay? But we have a high value in our family for honesty. And so we talk about why with our kids. And when our kids do the wrong things and they confess to it, we stop for a minute, forget the wrong thing you did. Let's talk about the fact that you told the truth, how incredible that is, and stop and celebrate that. Secondly, in a practical way, just where to start, just focus on this week. Don't worry about next year, next month, just this week. When you get to Saturday, this coming Saturday, take 5 minutes, sit down as a family. Even if you can't get your family together, you sit down, take 5 minutes, just evaluate your schedule, the week that you're finishing. Were you as busy as you wanted to be? Did you make something? Did you say no to something? There's some things you need. Make some adjustments for the week ahead. It's so simple. I feel stupid even saying it, and even worse, you'll be tempted to ignore it and not do it. I love the way that one guy put it, where he said, if something doesn't show up in your week, you can talk about how important it is to you, but it's just not important. If it doesn't matter enough to show up in your week, it doesn't really matter to you. Oh, man, that is, shut up, whoever wrote that, right? See, this is not about like guilt or shame or condemnation. There's none of that. So the question is, are the lives that we're living, is the schedule you're keeping likely to produce the kind of traits, the kind of family that we say we value, or the results that we say we want? Like, honestly. And if the answer is no, then just make some adjustments. It might be time to start doing some training in your family. You don't have to set the world on fire. Just get better in a small way this week. You do that in enough weeks, big changes, trajectories of all that stuff will start to shift around. Remember, you're just practicing. It's about consistency. It's not about perfection. It's about the direction that you're going as a family. The goal is to get your family to the place where when someone asks, why is your family like that? Or why do you guys always do that thing? Why is that so important to you guys? That without thinking about it, without hesitation, the automatic response is, that's just what we do. That's just who we are. This is just what our family's like. And here's the best news of all. You don't have to do any of it alone. There are some just good ideas in here, but there's also some great stuff that's packaged in modern ideas, but it's really timeless truth for us from God through the scriptures, for us to learn how to lean in and have healthier, stronger relationships and families. And so my question for you this morning is, what is God saying to you right now? What is God talking to you about right now, about your life and your relationships and your family? What do you think he's inviting you to do? What are the adjustments that he's wanting you to make? Let's bring it all to him and ask for his help, because we all have gaps, but that's the good news this morning, is that grace fills the gaps while we're learning to train and get our legs under us and get better to move forward. Let's pray together. God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for who you are. Lord, every single one of us have challenges, no matter what our family looks like, trying to figure out, Lord, some of us are tucking some of this stuff away for a future, what our family will be in the future when we get married or have kids. Some of us, God, this stuff can be applied right where we are right now. All of us, Lord, have families and have relationships. All of us can learn and grow. all of us can begin training ourselves so that we can train together the people in our family. Lord, I pray, God, for anybody just feeling overwhelmed, Lord, that they would know that your heart, that your love, that your grace is reaching out to them. Lord, and that's the beautiful part about your love and grace, is that we all just get to start where we are. None of us have to compare our beginning to someone else's middle. We can just begin where we are, no matter what stage of life our family's in, no matter what our relationships are like. God, we can get better and stronger, that we can have conversations. If it's just us and our spouse, God, we can talk about who we want to be and what we want our marriage to be like, and how we're going to, how our family and our home is going to operate. God, if it's just us and our kids, Lord, we can sit down and begin to have conversations with them about who we are and why we are that way. God, the truth is we're all already training. The systems, the practices, the routines, the rituals, the rhythms of our families, they're already ingrained. They're already producing something. Lord, now we're just aware that we can shift those things, that we can make some adjustments. We can let go of some things. Lord, we can say no to some good stuff so that we can say yes to the best stuff. Lord, thank you for loving us. Thank you for your grace. We honor you this morning. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. If you are not a follower of Jesus, we would love to have that conversation with you this morning. That the biggest gap that exists for all of us is between us and our Creator. And the good news, as we celebrated this morning through communion, is that Jesus steps into the gap and fills that gap that we could never fill. And so we would love to talk to you about what that looks like. If you're interested in having that conversation, if you want to talk to somebody about your family, have questions for me or anybody else, you just want to pray with someone, we are here for you. Thanks so much for being here today. The band's going to play us out, but you can stand to your feet. And if you want to stick around, you can. If you want to go enjoy some cupcakes and cookies and all that good stuff, you can be released. Thanks for being here today. God bless you. Have an amazing week. We'll see you next Sunday.
His arms